Hello class. Okay, this is a short lesson in consumer and producer surplus, and then how the economic concept of a market failure applies. Now, market failure in economics has a precise meaning. It doesn't have the street meaning that you see out there sometimes, like some people will see, and I've seen you write on the post that we consume too much fast food, or our cars are too big, or we drive too much, or whatever. Those aren't really market failures in the economic sense, because those are value judgments. In economics, we just take as a given that consumers are purchasing those things that maximize their happiness, or we say utility. And economics doesn't really get into the idea of you shouldn't have done that, you should have done something else. We just assume, again, that consumers are kind of sovereign and they do whatever they want. And if I don't understand why they do it, for example, I don't understand why people smoke, but they do. So a market failure in economics doesn't have to do with what we judge to be bad behavior. It has to do with whether or not the market over-allocates or under-allocates a particular product. And for a regular good where there's not a market failure, here's how it works. We have two concepts. One is consumer surplus, and it's defined to be the area below the demand curve and above the selling price. So this area right here would be consumer surplus, this triangle. And then there's a similar concept called producer surplus, which is the area above the supply curve but below the selling price, and so it would look like this triangle over here. And while I don't really want to get into the proof of it too much, it should be kind of obvious that consumer surplus and producer surplus is maximized when the economy produces at PE and QE. Any other choice, so you might imagine that the government might set a price floor or a price ceiling someplace else, and it's not too hard to show that when the government does that, it generates less consumer and producer surplus than would be the case if we just let the market set the price at equilibrium. Maybe later, if any of you ask me, I can do one to show how that when you put a unit tax on supply and demand, that the tax kind of erodes away some of the consumer surplus and some of the producer surplus, but of course it goes to tax revenue that the government gets to purchase things that we demand collectively. But in the process of that, a certain amount of the consumer surplus and the producer surplus is lost, and that's called a deadweight loss. Maybe I can show you that. If we put a unit tax on here, it would cause a supply curve to shift back to the left. So this would be the supply curve after the tax, where the vertical distance between the two curves is the tax. And of course it would drive the price up to here. And normally we call this the price that consumers pay. And then of course we give that money to the shopkeeper, but the shopkeeper has to give the tax back to the government, which would put them down to here. Since the red supply curve and the black supply curve are parallel, this distance right here, which is the tax, is the same everywhere. So this distance is also the tax, and that leaves the producer after the tax with this amount down here, which we call the price producers get. So can you see that this little red box is the tax revenue that's going to be collected by the government? Maybe you can't see it, so let's just make up some numbers. Let's say this number up here is 80, and this number down here is 60, for example. And that would mean the difference between the price producers get and the price consumers pay is $20. So the tax was $20. And then if they sold, let's just make it really simple. Let's imagine that number is 100. So the tax revenue generated would be $20 times 100 units sold, or the area of that red box. Now I hope you can see that that red box is kind of carved out of what was consumer surplus and producer surplus. But in the process of carving out that red box, a certain amount of surplus is lost, and that's this little shaded part over here that I'm shading in green. I can't tell if you can see it's green or not, but this little piece over here, this little triangle, used to be consumer and producer surplus, but it's now lost. And it has a funny name. That little distance is called the dead weight loss. The dead weight loss. So in the process of raising this revenue for the government, consumers have lost some surplus, producers have lost some surplus, and the government has gained some tax revenue. But when you add all that up, what consumers lost and what producers lost, and then add back the gain that the government got, it doesn't quite equal, because this little piece over here was lost and there's no offsetting gain. So if you did one of these in algebra, you would have an equation for that demand and supply curve, and these numbers would be known. So, you know, we would have all these numbers here, and we could calculate the areas of these little triangles. And there was a problem kind of like this on, I think, the summer school of 2009. I think it was question 4. And in a minute I'll load that up and we can work it together. But this is the theory behind it. Okay, so I hope that's helpful to you. And, well, good luck.